Good evening. This is Lawrence Holgate, and this is episode 13 of Understanding John Stuart Mill and his classic book, Utilitarianism. I'm going to do something unusual in chapter 13. I'm in episode 13. We're still reading chapter 5 of Utilitarianism, and I'm going to give you an imaginary conversation between John Stuart Mill and John Locke about the idea of natural rights. And I do this to illustrate the vast difference between Mill's account of the origin of rights and John Locke's theory of natural rights. So we have the scene is a pub in central London. And remember, all we're going to do is talk about Locke and Mill. I'll give you both of the characters, or I'll be doing both of the characters. So the scene is a pub in central London. Locke is sitting in the pub waiting for Mill. Mill comes in, and Locke says, "Good evening, Mill. I just read Utilitarianism, and I was surprised and disappointed to find that you make no mention of natural rights. As you know, natural rights are a staple of liberal political philosophy, and I wrote extensively about this in Second Treatise of Government." Mill responds, "And good evening to you, Locke. How do you define a natural right?" "Well, Mill, a natural right is a right that a person has in the state of nature, as determined by the law of nature." "What is the state of nature? Is it a place where people live?" Locke says, "The words state of nature do not specify a place. They specify a type of relationship between two or more persons. It is a pre-political relationship in which there is no authorized third party or umpire to whom people can turn to settle disputes about what laws exist or whether a law has been violated." Mill, "So if there is a dispute about what rights are valid, there is no way to decide this?" Locke, "Now I get to ask you a question. What do you mean by a valid right?" Mill, "A valid right is a claim on society to protect the alleged right holder from harm, by either the force of law or by education and opinion. For example, you and I have a right to life because a claim to have our life protected by the force of law is guaranteed by civil society. On the other hand, we do not have a right to be given a new horse and buggy every year because any such claim is not guaranteed by society." Locke says, "I understand. So, based on what you just said, there are no valid rights in the state of nature. I agree that there is no mechanism for making a claim on society because, by definition, there is no civil society. If anyone insists that what another person has done violates the law of nature, he's on his own. Most people in a state of nature are ignorant of the natural law anyway, and even if they think they know the law, there is no one they can call on for validation or for enforcement." Mill, "If there's no way to prove, that is, validate, that something does or does not belong to a person by right in the state of nature, then your idea of a natural right seems to me to be so much empty noise. What would be the point of going around announcing that you have a right to life if you have no claim on others to protect you in the possession of it? As my godfather Jeremy Bentham once said, the idea of a natural right is nonsense upon stilts." Locke, "That assessment is a bit harsh. The natural rights to life, liberty, health, and possessions can still serve a purpose as an ideal set of rights that a society ought to adopt as positive law." Mill, "I agree that these rights ought to be legally enacted, but if you ask me why I agree, I can give no other reason than general utility." "Oh, I was going to say that they ought to be adopted because they are natural rights." Mill, "Isn't that what you said when we started this conversation?" Now, the point of all this is to show you that Locke gets himself into a circle. He starts out by saying that there are natural rights, and at the end, he simply bases his idea that there are natural rights on the claim that there are natural rights. He has no proof of this. He has no evidence. He tells us that rights are pre-political, but that's about it. Let's turn now to section 5.7 of chapter 5. It has the title, "The Ambiguity of the Internal Oracle of Justice." Non-utilitarians, like John Locke and Immanuel Kant, believe that justice is totally independent of utility. Moreover, Mill writes, they believe that the dictates of justice carry their evidence in themselves, and therefore, on questions of justice, there could be no controversy. Now, Mill responds that if we adopt justice as our standard, then its application to any given case, quote, would leave us in as little doubt as a mathematical demonstration. Page 54 of Utilitarianism. But there are many doubts. Mill gives several examples showing that there is as much difference of opinion and as much doubt about what is just as there is about what is useful. Let's take the first case that Mill presents here to prove his point is that there is just simply confusion about natural rights, is in the area of amounts and kinds of punishment. I'm reading now at section 5.7.1 of my book. Consider, for example, questions about the amount and manner of punishment. How much and what kind of punishment should legislators and judges apportion to criminal offenses? Some would reply that a just kind of punishment should be to do the same to the offender as the offender did to his victim. This is the retributive principle of an eye for an eye, and applied to a conviction for murder, it demands that the only just punishment for this crime is to put the murderer to death. Now, it's been objected that this interpretation of the principle of justice could be used to justify an unjust sentence of death for someone who accidentally kills another. Because if the aim is to do the same to the offender as the offender did to the victim, then it's irrelevant that the offender killed the victim accidentally. He killed the victim, and that result can only be matched by taking the life of the killer. A body for a body. Second, it has been argued that the retributive principle of an eye for an eye is just too narrow. There are many criminal offenses for which it has no meaningful application. Property crimes are at the top of the list. If a homeless person is convicted of arson for burning down a $1 million house, there's nothing identical that the state can do to the arsonist that would match his crime. Perhaps they could purchase a house, give the deed to the arsonist, and then burn down the arsonist's new house? That's ridiculous, of course. On the other side of the argument about the application of pure justice to decide the appropriate manner and amount of punishment, there are those who would have it proportioned to the moral guilt of the culprit. And this assumes that there is a standard by which moral guilt can be measured, and on this point, there is extensive controversy. Consider the case of the man who draws a gun and fires point blank at his intended victim, but fails to hit him. Some would argue that a failed attempt should be punished as severely as a successful murder, because in both cases there was an intent to kill. Others would use the principle of justice to argue that attempts to kill should be punished less severely, because legal and moral guilt requires a dead body. Actus reus is the Latin, as well as the guilty mind. Mens rea is the same as what is meant by guilty mind. Let's go to the abortion debate to see what Mill would say about it. He has several examples in Chapter 5, by the way, each illustrating his point about the continuing controversy over the correct application of justice. I'm going to leave these examples to the reader, to you, the reader, and instead I'm going to use an example of a contemporary controversy that really wasn't contemplated by Mill or any other moral philosophers in the 19th century. I believe that it proves Mill's point that it is nearly impossible to get any unanimity about the morality of conduct by using justice alone to decide the case. The example I have chosen is from the long debate about the morality of abortion. The debate is as intense and as unsettled between those who use only the principle of justice and its corollaries as it is between them and those who use the principle of utility and its corollaries. At one extreme are those who argue that the only relevant consideration is whether the abortion is the result of an intention to kill the fetus. And here's the standard anti-abortion or pro-life argument. It goes like this. Premise 1. Abortion is the intentional killing of an innocent human being. Premise 2. It is always wrong, unjust, to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Premise 3. The fetus from the moment of conception is an innocent human being. 4. Therefore, it is always wrong, unjust, to kill the fetus. Premise 5, or conclusion. Therefore, abortion is always wrong. Or you can say abortion is always unjust. But others who also use only the ideas of justice and rights in moral decision-making have challenged the standard argument. Some have objected to premise 1 by claiming that some abortions are not intentional. Thus, if a pregnant woman has uterine cancer and the uterus must be removed, thereby killing the fetus inside, the intention of the physician is not to kill the fetus, but to save the life of the woman. The death of the fetus is an unexpected but unintended consequence of the removal of the uterus. Other people have objected to premise 2, that says it is always wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. They claim that not all cases of killing an innocent human being are unjust. Suppose that the fetus is the unwanted product of a rape. We can all admit that this fetus is innocent, having nothing to do with occupying the rape victim's body. But it's been argued that it is entirely relevant to point out that the fetus has no right to occupy the rape victim's uterus. Its presence in her body is not the woman's choice. She did not invite it in. Secondly, another important right that should be used in deciding this case is the right to liberty. The right of a woman to make the final choice about what happens in and to her own body, especially when a pregnancy is unwanted. But anti-abortionist, pro-life people respond that although the presence of the fetus in the woman's body is unwanted, the right to life should be broadly interpreted to include the right to be provided whatever the fetus requires to survive. They would also contend that the right to life trumps the right to liberty. Therefore, the right of the fetus to survive has priority over the right of a woman to make decisions about whether the fetus will remain in or be expelled from her body. This controversy is not going to be decided, by the way, in these pages. The point of using the preceding contemporary argument over the justice of abortion is to show that Mill is correct in saying that an application of justice alone is not simple, and certainly not at all like a mathematical demonstration. There's nothing in the idea of justice that will help us to prioritize the rights mentioned in a way that will settle the debate. It has certainly not settled the controversy between pro-life and pro-choice opponents over the morality of abortion. I'm going to close at that point. We've done up through 5.7, and I will promise that next week is going to be the final episode 14. So please listen in again. And I think I might have said that this was going to be the last episode, but I think this chapter is just too long. You've heard enough. We've discussed Mill's idea of a right. You've listened to my little back and forth between John Locke and John Stuart Mill about the idea of a natural right, which Mill rejects. And we've looked at the application of the concept of justice, which is the word that that Locke and others use, which they claim is somehow something that we know exactly how to apply. Mill wants to show that that's just not true, and you cannot attack the principle of utility on the ground that it's too loose, that there's too much we can do. It's too expansive. There's too much that it simply can't explain. Mill says the same thing goes for those who want to talk about natural rights. There's as much confusion there. Maybe there's confusion everywhere. I don't know. Let's see how Mill tries to discuss this in the final episode of Understanding John Stuart Mill. We'll do that next week. And then in episode 14, where Mill is going to claim, and I'll just tip it off a little bit, he's going to claim that the concept of justice is a concept that should be just grounded on utility. And as such, justice grounded on utility is the chief part of all morality. We'll see how he works this out next week. Thank you for listening.